All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about strategies for identifying and developing high potential employees today. My name is Chad Carlisle. I'm a senior consultant for DeGarmo. Many of you know my colleague Anthony Adorno, or at least received communications from him for this webinar. He unfortunately had a family emergency, so I'm filling in for him today. We're also very lucky to be joined by our three panelists, Elisa, Lori, and Carla, who I'll be introducing a little more fully in just a moment. Just some quick housekeeping before we begin. Everyone is on mute right now just due to the large number of people on the call. So we encourage you, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A dialog box in the GoToWebinar interface during the session, and we'll do our best to reserve some time at the end to address as many of those questions as we can. And also want to let you know that I am also recording this webinar. Want to remind everyone that this session qualifies for SHRM or HRCI credit. The session ID will be sent to you within a week following today's session. Please note that in order to receive credit, you do need to stay on the webinar until the end. So be looking out for that in about a week. No need to reach out to us. We will get it to you very soon. Also, the PowerPoint deck as well as some other materials are available as handouts on the webinar interface, so you can download those files before the webinar ends if you would like to have them. So I'd like to take a quick minute to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to welcome Elisa Bannon-Jones from Frontier Communications. I'm sure many of you know Frontier is a Fortune 500 telecommunications company with around 20,000 employees. Elisa is Frontier's Chief Talent Officer and brings a great wealth of experience from her time in telecom as well as hospitality and cable and other industries. So welcome, Elisa. Next, let me introduce Lori Jerome. She is from Experian. Experian's a global information services company. It's headed out of Ireland, have about 17,000 employees worldwide. And Lori is their Vice President of Talent Management and brings a diverse experience from everything from entertainment industry, healthcare, and several more. So welcome, Lori. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Carla Wiseman joins us from First American Financial. First American is a leading title insurance and real estate services provider, around 18,000 employees, and Carla is their Vice President of Learning and Development, and she brings with her some great experience from academia, nonprofit, Big Five accounting, and others. So welcome, Carla, and welcome to all of our panelists. Thanks for being here. Anthony and I work for DeGarmo. Again, my name is Chad Carlisle. DeGarmo is a talent assessment, analytics, and consulting company. We help clients identify talent assessment solutions that provide talent intelligence that's needed to make better selection decisions, identify potential, drive development, and more. So that's who we are. That's who you're going to be hearing from today. So let's get right into the topic at hand. We're very grateful that our panelists are here with us because today we're going to learn about, as I said, strategies for identification and development of high potential employees. And even though this topic has been around for a while, it remains a heavily discussed, heavily debated one. Many organizations, probably most organizations, are still trying to figure this out, right? And it is important that they do that. The literature shows that if organizations want to stay competitive, they need a strong pipeline of talent. More specifically, a strong pipeline of internal talent for leadership roles. Thus, the need for strong and successful HiPo programs. However, many of these HiPo programs fail. They either fail to properly identify high potentials, fail to develop them, and of course, understandably, some organizations don't yet have a HiPo program at all. So, as a result, there's a variety of approaches still out there for HiPo programs. There's a lot of diversity in terms of where organizations are in their development of their programs, how mature those programs are. So as a result of that, there's a great deal of learning that we can do when we hear what others are doing, what's worked for them, what has not worked, and how we might be able to apply certain elements of this to our own HiPo program. So that's why I'm particularly thrilled to have our panel of experts here to share with us from their experiences, and they bring just among them some great diversity, great experiences in terms of their current organization, where their programs are, what they've learned along the way. So looking forward to hearing from them. But before I present them with some questions to kind of get us started, I want to quickly walk you through some interesting data, most of which comes from the registration questions that all of you on the phone answered. So again, this is available in the handouts, so I'm not going to talk through every one of these, but I just wanted to pull out a couple of highlights. Probably the most important one I want to highlight is the fact that over half of the organizations included do not have a formal HiPo program. So this aligns with some of the numbers that you see in the literature and some of what I just shared, and further supports just the need for continued discussion on this topic with so much opportunity to develop these programs. Also point out, this is an interesting question for us to ask around the 9 box. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about the use of 9 box for high potential identification from our panelists, but it's considered one of, if not the most popular, albeit subjective, method of identification of HiPo, and yet still we have obviously a small percentage that are using it, and some that aren't yet familiar with it, which we can hopefully help clarify here shortly. So that had to do with identification of high potentials, but when we talk about development of high potentials, as you can see here, the method with which development needs are identified is widely varied, if it exists at all. So there's no sort of clear winner there as far as that is concerned. And less than a quarter of our respondents agree that their HiPo program is adequately supporting development. So majority feel that they're either not sure or it's not supporting the development. Which is interesting. That bottom metric there indicates that half of the respondents think the program is meeting its objectives. So that may be a matter of how the HiPo program is perceived, whether there's a big split between identification versus development, any number of things. But bottom line is you see a wide variety here, and opportunity for continued growth. Similarly, when asked to think about what do you need for your HiPo program, what would be most beneficial for its continued success and future success, there's no real clear direction as to what is needed. It's fairly even between things like, we need better programs to help develop these folks. We need more formal tools for identification of HiPos, and many others. So again, we're kind of across, all over the map here, sort of across the board. And the last item I'll share, this is actually from Harvard Business Review, which I think is really compelling, is that even when we do have a HiPo program, and we're running it and it's moving forward, as many as 40% of those who are considered high potentials and are in the HiPo program, at the end of the day, don't actually belong in the program. So there's a number of potential reasons for this, which we'll probably get into as we get into some of our discussion here. But that's just a little bit of sort of background, a little bit of data to kind of get us started, get us thinking as we move on to our panelists and start walking through some questions. So we've got 4 primary questions we're going to try to talk through today, about defining high potential, how do you identify them, and sort of what's the difference there. Once you pinpoint that talent, how do you provide development so that they actually reach that potential? And then finally, assuming we have time, how transparent is your HiPo program? Okay, so let's jump right in, and let's start with Lori, and talk about the question of how do you define high potential talent. So Lori, can you share a little bit around how Experian defines high potential talent?
Absolutely, and there is a fine line between defining high potentials and then identifying high potentials. And it resonated with me as you were just sharing that a lot of organizations put people through programs, and that's really not the time to define or identify. You really want to make sure you've got your strong high potentials and you invest in them in those programs, which is what we do. But one of the things, and it's more recent and top of mind for me at Experian, we've got a program that we're about to design and launch for high potentials at a deeper level into the organization. We've got some strong historical programs that have done really well, and we continue to refine those for the higher level leadership. But we're going further into middle management within our organization. So I just recently conducted a focus group with our executives and senior leaders and asked them what they thought high potential was and what that looked like, what were the attributes. And some of the things that they came up with were, oh, agility, ambition, you know, they deliver, they have followership. And I said, well, what's the difference between that and somebody who performs really well? And they're scratching their heads a bit. So I always bring out this particular slide that's in front of you is really what's the difference across potential when it comes to you know, what you're seeing. And this really resonates with our leaders. The far left-hand side, and if any of you are using the 9-box, this is the far left side of the potential within the 9-box, those role model experts, proven experts. So those who are performing well within their technical domain, so to speak. So the definition is really for us, superb performers year after year, depth of organizational knowledge, you know, they're trusted resources, they're hard to replace. Those are the individuals that might be our data scientists or individuals that might be in a, you know, corporate legal or certain finance positions. They love what they do, but they don't aspire to go across the organization. They aspire vertically up within their professional domain. So we define that as high professionals. And then the high performers, which is what we're really trying to refine, is the difference between a high performer and a high potential. So the performers, high performers, or high potentials could be high performers, but not all high performers are high potentials. So high performers exceed goals, consistently perform at high levels, and you know, our executives were nodding their heads, yep, 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 you know, develops and leads direct reports to achieve results, you know, enjoys growth, available in current or similar roles, show signs of being able to lead without having to be the technical expert. And I'll go to this bottom bullet in just a minute. But the high potentials, the difference is, and what we start to see is they're agile learners. You can put them in environments that are ambiguous or not fully known, and they can actually excel and do well. They can promote outside of their area of you know, domain or responsibility or area of expertise. They try different approaches, have courage to take risks, they're very curious, they deal with the ambiguity. The fun one is that they're impatient and they don't accept the status quo, and leaders always say there's the individuals that can be troublesome and they're, you know, pushing the envelope, and those are the ones you want to test that potential and channel it further. But we always tell our executives and leaders, don't set them aside. They may be difficult or challenging, but they may be high potentials but diamonds in the rough. So it depends on an individual's, not only their learning agility but strong performance, but also, you know, their EQ, emotional intelligence, but they also are individuals that that truly, you put them in a new situation and they usually figure it out really well and rather quickly. So that's the far right side of the 9-box, so to speak, the consistent stars, future stars. At the bottom right of a 9-box, it's the diamonds in the rough. You haven't really tapped or channeled the potential in the right direction. So going back finally to this last bullet in the center is, if you are using the 9-box in determining, you know, the talent matrix of where people fall, and then eventually determining where they fall in the 9-box helps you determine if they've got potential to be on succession charts for other positions across the organization. But if people stay in your center column for too long, you really eventually have to decide, are they one of those technical experts that are going to stay and move up in their vertical, or should we start testing them? And we do that, and I'll talk later about the programs we put them through to be high potential. So that's something that we use to help delineate the three.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. That's a nice, clean, organized structure. Carla, if I can hand over to you, can I ask you the same question? How do you guys define high potential talent at First American?
Sure, thank you. So at the start, you kind of indicated that the speakers here were at different stages of maturity and development of their HiPo programs, and we're probably one of the more early nascent kind of groups where we started out doing this and trying to get people to understand and define what a high potential is. We had, similar to Lori, we had some challenges with our senior executives confusing high performance and high potential, and looking at those two things almost synonymously versus that a high potential is someone who also performs well but has some different attributes. And so we adopted the CEB model, which looks at aspiration, ability, and engagement, and have really spelled this out for folks a little bit. And some of the things are very similar to what Lori talked about. But when we look at someone who is high potential in the organization, not only do they have that aspiration to rise to senior levels, and this is one thing we've had to level set a little bit with our leadership, is that not only do they have the aspiration to do that, we can actually see them doing that as well. So we oftentimes have people who want to rise to senior levels, but they don't have the ability or an engagement around that to be able to be successful at those higher levels. So the aspiration is both sides of the coin, both the employees' desire to do so, but the leaders' ability to see that in them as well. When we talk about someone having ability or engagement, we are talking about some of the things Lori talked about, that figure out ability, meaning we put them into an unusual situation and they're able to adapt. They're an agile learner. They figure things out pretty quickly. I always talk about it being growing beyond the job. So as new challenges arise, they quickly assess them, figure them out, and move on. There's someone who can see the connectedness between different functions and different processes within the organization and understand how they impact those or how those impact them and how their people get work done. They're good in change and ambiguity, like Lori said, as well. But they're also, any limitations they have can really be addressed through a targeted or minimal development or experiences to get them to the next level. But what they have is just some little modifications here and there that will get them to that next level. On that engagement is that building the knowledge beyond their own scope of responsibility. We're constantly looking for people that not only are committed to remaining at the organization through the appropriate incentives or development, we're looking for people who can figure it out, that they have a natural curiosity and they like to do it. I liked how Lori said her organization sometimes calls them those troublemakers. I would say that's kind of, we don't actually use those words, but that's kind of who the people are. They're like, oh, they keep asking questions. Questions are good. Natural curiosity is good if it's channeled in the right direction. And so when we talk about our high potentials in the organization, we are looking at these three things. Someone who is more medium potential is on these same things, but it's going to be a much longer time frame. We actually use a little bit of time bound in identifying our high potentials to better understand kind of where that time commitment is, and that then plays as well into our succession planning and succession pool. So we do tie our identification of high potentials into succession plans and succession pools, as well as using the 9-box to kind of really visualize that for our business leaders and drive that forward a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Carla, and thanks for bringing up the point about the connection between the high potential program and succession planning. There's a lot of, obviously, great opportunity there to make sure those two, sometimes separate programs, make sure those are actually working together. Thank you for that. Just to share just real briefly a sort of a DeGarmo perspective on definition of high potential talent. Our R&D team has been working for months now and sort of combing the scientific and professional literature to establish an understanding of what's common about high potential, even thinking about it regardless of industry. And we've established a developmental model of HiPo Talent. So you can look at this in the handout for more detail, but fundamentally we have it, like I said, is this developmental model of high potential talent. And as you move up in the model, you move from those more inherent abilities that we need to see, those abilities and motivations, up to the dimensions that can more easily be developed over time, such as interpersonal and leadership style. So we look at things like, again, those fundamental abilities and motivations, ability to envision how future events will unfold, actively seeking opportunities to learn, that sort of natural curiosity that both Lori and Carla mentioned, all the way up into, as you move into the more interpersonal and leadership style sides of things, seeking networking, building opportunities, mentoring and inspiring others. So we'll share a bit more about what we're doing with this model later, but I wanted to just also present just from the types of characteristics we use to help define what a high potential individual might look like. So let's move on to identification. So we talked about definition. Obviously, then there needs to be a connection to how we actually go through the process of identifying who those HiPos are. So I'd like to start with Elisa on this one, if I may. Elisa, I know you're currently exploring methods for identification of HiPos, and among other tools, you guys use 9box. Can you tell us a bit about your process and if possible, how you use 9box as well?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting topic because, you know, as I listen to the co-panelists present and even Chad speak, it's really about putting a thread through everything we're doing so that everything's connected, right? So that's that seamless integration, whether it's talent acquisition and how we're assessing leaders coming into the organization. And then it's, you know, the identification of talent, but talking that language. And what we found is Frontier has leveraged the 9box tool. It did it 2 years ago. It didn't do it last year because we did a very large integration where we doubled in size, so that didn't seem appropriate. But the interesting piece that we found was we did an activity, we did an event, and then it sort of sat there, right? And people didn't miss it last year when we didn't do it, so we thought, oh my goodness. And so part of our identifying and using effective tools to be able to bring these high potentials to the forefront is to ensure that our leaders get some cadence and regularity and familiarity with what that means. So what we have done is we haven't let go of the 9box. That's still a part of our process. But we took a leadership competency model, and for this activity, because this is our first high potential group that we're going to have, you know, more to do after we do the event, we're focusing on leaders. In particular for us, we said, okay, we can't do everything, so let's focus on directors and above. So we actually built an end-to-end talent review process that a part of it isn't just the Frontier leadership capabilities, which, by the way, we're building an assessment for that, so that's going to be, you know, table stakes to even join our organization. But it's also 4 other key elements in there. The 9box certainly stays, but what do we do beyond 9box? But what we really wanted to also do in this process is have our leaders understand what is performance. Are there people above target, on target, below target, because we don't have numbers anymore? Is that a factor? Is what somebody does now and how they're achieving their targets, you know, a prerequisite to be a high potential? We said yes, because we need to drive business results. The second piece that we measure is the succession readiness, right? If someone's ready now, that's less than a year, let's fine tweak them. If somebody's a future successor, then that's really where we want to focus our high potential group on. And if they're stable, that's good too, we need that. But 2 other pieces that we wanted to factor into our talent review process is mobility. Is somebody able to relocate? Will somebody relocate for the right opportunity? And is somebody just not mobile? Because if we're going to take a particular group and do post-identification development, we want to know where we can put these people and what we're developing them to do. And then finally, retention, right? Because a lot of high potential programs, or a lot of things that we do as talent leaders, are a reaction to somebody saying they're leaving or they're being pursued. And so the process that we put together is really an end-to-end holistic view. We do it for all managers and above, and out of this, there's that criteria that they have to meet. So we talk about, you know, the right side of the box, being a rising star, a future leader, a current star, so the right hand, you know, 1, 2, or 3 boxes. But then there's other considerations that we are now empowering, enabling our leaders to understand the language of what this all means together. And then when we do these talent reviews, you are coming out truly with the highest potential that we now can develop to move across the organization.
That's great, Elisa. And there was a question that came in right before you started talking, and I think you answered it perfectly. It is not. There's a number of factors to consider here. Obviously, how do you think about what does potential even mean? We've talked about that, but obviously bringing current performance into it, understanding performance, but then also understanding through assessments and other categories, and understanding their motivations and their aspiration. All of these factors come into play when identifying who should really be categorized as a high potential talent. Thank you for that. Lori, could I ask you to share a bit about your HiPo identification process experience?
Sure, and it's still evolving and growing as we move along, and very similar to what Elisa was sharing is that we do integrate the view of high potential across that employee life cycle. So before I even get to this slide and what's on the slide, because that's identification for a program, but really to start to look before they go through a program, what is high potential? What would that look like? And we start to look at questions we would ask in the interview process, so starting with just really looking externally as well as internally. What are we asking individuals to do or be, or what would we be looking for? Obviously, and then going back to what Carla was sharing, is that identification of high potentials is about, one, their performance, but it's also about their desire, their ambition, and their interest level. And so we've got some high potentials that just for them personally, they're not ready to move up and around into different roles. Elisa mentioned mobility. We do take that into consideration when we place people, as we talk in talent review, into the succession plans. Where do they fall on succession charts from a readiness standpoint? They could be ready tomorrow for a certain role, but if their mobility wouldn't take them there, we have to move them down in that readiness level. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at as you start to think about the succession as well as the high potentials. For us in the talent review process and succession planning, we do use the 9-box, but we also really take care of who's on succession charts, what succession charts, and the biggest challenge is assessing where people would fall in their readiness. And then once you get them, and decide who falls into what area for the future, how do you actually develop to move that needle in readiness? And what we found at Experian is we've got it really down when it comes to getting the right people, but when they go further down into the organization, oftentimes they'll fall off, and all of a sudden somebody goes from hero to zero, and you go, wait, what happened? Well, we really didn't assess them well enough. So it's the assessment, and then it's the development. Those are the two areas that I think are the trickiest and most difficult when it comes to identifying who's ready for what roles. And so because of even getting people who are 2 years out from a role ready, we found that we still wanted to look at them for a specific program. We had some VPs that we put through this program. The slide that we have up here, it's actually called Self-Driven Succession. And so we had 15 vice presidents go through this to determine for a full year, what's their ambition, what's their drive, what's their readiness. So we were able to kind of test what we hoped we had found on succession plans. And so we were looking for individuals to go through this that were at least on one or more succession charts. And this goal was to really get them developed and close that gap in readiness. So they were at a readiness level of 2 or less years. High consideration given to those on critical role succession charts. So when we had to decide who actually gets to go through this, because it's high intense and it is a small group, their names were identified by business unit leaders during their North America, our interim talent review. We do talent review twice a year. And then high performance ratings obviously is part of it. And then we validate the high potential. So of the 15 people, and I'll explain the program more later, but of the 15 people that went through the program at the end of a full year, 13 of the 15 eventually moved forward into other roles across and up the organization. So it really did help us to determine whether they were going to take the lead in driving their career success and development, because at a VP level, most individuals are doing their job, they're running their business, they're paying attention to the detail, driving performance, but they don't spend a lot of time on themselves and their own development. So we took a look at the gap between where they were and the role that they were identified for, and determined what were the things that they needed to be ready for that next level. They were coached by the individuals at that next level, and they took it to heart and really actually pushed forward and moved forward on it. So that was kind of one thing that we found very successful in not only identifying, but then getting them ready for those next level roles.
Excellent. Great. That was very helpful, Lori. Thank you. Let's now talk about development of high potentials. Carla, you run the L&D team at First American, and it's probably a topic near and dear to your heart. Maybe you can start us off and share a bit about your approach to developing HiPos at First American.
Sure. So I'm probably going to focus on one of our programs in general, in specifics that we've been using to develop high potentials. When I mentioned we're one of the younger folks that approaches this whole talent planning and high potential aspect, we had a lot of really great leadership development programs that I don't think we were that intentional about who we were sending to them. So when I joined the organization, realized that we had some really great tools already there to develop high potentials, just we needed to do a better job of selecting the people to go to them. And over the several years that I've been here, it had started before I got here, but we've gotten a lot more intentional about who gets sent to those programs, using a lot of different data points that come out of either the performance reviews or the talent reviews that we do, and using the 9-box and identifying those folks. But one of the biggest areas that we saw that we were having some issues with getting talent in the more senior levels of the organization was particularly as it relates to women. We have our organization about 68% women, and yet at the senior levels we're far below that number in our executive ranks. And so one of the things we looked at is how do we increase the visibility? How do we improve the experiences that those that our future leaders get, so that they can both develop the skills they need to be successful at those more senior roles, that personal development, but also how do we make sure people know who they are and they are a viable talent to take on those roles. And so out of that came our women's leadership, women in leadership program that really targets our high potentials who happen to be female leaders in the organization. And not only is it a program, meaning that they go for a couple days for a personal development and develop certain skill sets, but it is a year-long process in which they work on a company-identified challenge or issue that either impacts revenue, competitive advantage, scalability, et cetera, but it crosses our business units. We tend to be a very siloed organization. And so one thing we're trying to do is not only get leaders to look at talent across the organization, not just in their own business unit, but also get people to understand they're part of a much bigger organization and expand their horizons. Because as we know, being a leader in an organization taking on a broader role really means being able to visualize, understand the bigger picture, the interconnectedness between them, and how to leverage some of the stuff that already goes on in the organization without rebuilding it on your own. And so what we've seen has happened from these projects is not only do they work on them across the organization, they make a recommendation to our senior leadership team. So they meet with the CEO and the COO and CFO and several others to present their recommendations about how to go forward and solve this problem. What we've seen is some really good outcomes from that is that things have gotten implemented in the organization. So once the women's leadership group proposes it, then they decide what business unit's going to take it and run with it or beta test it. And we've seen 2 of the projects in the last 4 years have gone forward. The class right now is in the process of presenting theirs. 1 year we had some regulatory and economic issues that kind of impacted projects going forward, so they kind of got put on the back burner. But we've seen a good success with not only the projects going forward, so increasing the visibility of the group. We've also seen that now that people know who they are, they get tap on the shoulder for other opportunities that they might not have gotten considered for before, because they might not have been visible, they might not have been known as a known entity. And so between the talent planning stuff that we're doing, but also creating these experiences, we're starting to see some better movement and better readiness of our participants as they go through the organization. And that's just one example of how we've done it, but looking at that has been probably one of our best examples of trying to find that talent and build them ready for that next role.
Excellent. Great, Carla. Thank you. Elisa, do you have some thoughts on your development approach for high potentials at Frontier? Share.
Yeah, and I think that's great because, right, going through a cohort model where you're bringing together cross-functional high potential talent is really important, and that's one of the things that we've embedded into our learning pathway as well. I'll tell you the one thing that's very, very interesting about Frontier is it's a 100-year-old company, and we have a lot of our team members, and we'll say director and above, they've been with this organization and they've been a part of Frontier for 10, 15 years, right? So one of our challenges is to be able to open their eyes so that they can look across the organization instead of just straight down it. And that was one great way that we're able to embed that cross-functional interpersonal skill building to solve a problem. The other piece is to be able to, in this cohort, they're also getting their focused individual development, right? So they're starting with the 360, they're going through their 8-month program, and then we're going to do another 360 so that we can see, did they grow as a leader? Did anything change? Did their team recognize any changes? And the other piece is the group learning activities, right? So that we bring them together twice a year during this time as a cohort, not only to touch base on their project, but also to get some instructor-led development. We hired an amazing head of learning and development, Tom Griffin, and so building that content so that they can become, better leaders and learn in that together. So it's 3 different pieces. It's right. It's how they lead and measuring them from their 360s, learning from others, and doing real work that helps them build that cross-functional expertise, and finally helping to develop them as they go through this 8-month journey with 2 on-site group learning days.
Excellent. Great. Thank you both for those specific examples. And now let me hand it over to Lori as well. If you can share a little bit about your approach to development.
Sure. I think there's a common thread here, or theme, with the programs from all of us, is that the word cohort. We've found and we've tried a variety of different ways to deliver and provide development, and cohort groups win overall for us. It really presents a little bit of internal competition as well as collaboration, and so yeah, we definitely go with the cohort group. This particular slide is, again, going back to that program we have called Self-Driven Succession. What we do, and we share this in a webinar for the individuals, the cohort that's been identified to participate and go through this, full-year program, we are very upfront with them, and we say, you've got to attend this webinar and learn what you're going to be, because it's very exciting when they get identified and tapped to come through a program like this. It's high visibility, and so we're very realistic for an hour to share what it is, what it isn't, what you'll gain from it, but how you'll be perceived and the visibility that you are going to get as somebody going through this program. They had exposure and visibility to our top global CEO who came out and other executives. So the executives know they're going through the program, and then we talk about this group during our talent review. So we share all of that. And the one thing that I share at the end of this 1-hour webinar is, if you aren't ready for this, you aren't personally ready to engage, participate, and prove yourself through it and drive this, then don't sign up for it now. If you've got personal circumstances that are going to hold you back, or some type of work-life balance and integration is too important right now, don't put yourself in front of, this highly visible program. And we did have one person that chose at that point in time not to attend, but the rest of them did. One actually, as I mentioned, one left the company, and one turned out not to be truly the highest of potential. They dropped out of the last face-to-face meeting. So it's something that we share right up front, so that there's no false expectations for the individuals going through it. And we want to put a little bit of a, be ready for this. Don't take it lightly. So if you go to the next slide, it just shares a little bit about some of the components of this program, is that we give them everything they need, from tools and, all of the different assessments and interactions and coaching and, business insight and visibility. But it's really up to them to drive it to the next level for themselves. So again, there's elements of assessment right up front, so they understand where their strengths and areas of development might be. There's a lot of time for discovery and reflecting as they come through some face-to-face programs. They do a lot of planning for themselves, which we expect, and they actually follow through with it because we give them time for that. And then they go beyond the program to drive it further. So it puts rigor and structure around something at the higher level that higher level individuals that they typically just don't take the time to do. A lot of high performers will not always do this, but they'll continue to drive business results. And if that's, actually we did have one individual who is a high performer within his business group. He has no desire after he went through this to expand beyond the business group that he's in. That's all he wants to do, and he's good at it. So that's okay, and we've engaged him and retained him, which is part of this process. So we are now, as I mentioned, designing something at a middle manager. We have a director level program as well, but a mid-management program that is going to really tap probably, we've got 700 at that level. We don't know yet how many are high potential. So we're looking forward to kind of seeing where that goes from here.
That's great. That's a nice clean structure. I appreciate you walking us through that.
Sure.
All right, so I just have a couple of minutes for this, our fourth question here, which is about transparency of the program. And we just heard from Lori. It sounds like there is pretty good transparency with, that's the approach that you take anyway for identifying high potentials, letting them know they're in the program. This is not always the case with some organizations, so I'd love to hear maybe at least from Carla and Elisa, and if you have other things to add, Lori, please do so. How transparent is your HiPo program? Do your HiPos know that they're HiPos, or do they use that term? Are they called HiPos? Carla, can we start with you?
Sure. So this is something that we do struggle with, and right now, because we are really so young in how we're just learning to define it all the same across the organization, we actually don't necessarily go and say, hey, by the way, you're a high potential. Part of that is because we do use kind of a time-bound sort of issue with defining high potentials, and that at this time, it's a kind of, at this point in time, you are a high potential, and we're looking for that next role, whether it be up or greater scope. So right now we are not actually telling people. I think there are a lot of managers who what they kind of do instead is inform people that they're really valuable to the organization. We see a future for them without actually putting a label on it, such as high potential. And so we spend a lot more time talking about the value that someone brings to the organization and how we might help them to continue to develop so they can continue to be successful here without actually saying you're high potential. Even with our succession plans, a lot of the conversation is not on that you are part of the succession plan for a particular position or not. It's more around how do we help you develop, how do we help you move forward, and how do we keep you engaged with the organization versus labeling it.
Got it. So more about working it into their development plan rather than having sort of some special set-aside label for them.
Yep.
Elisa, how about Frontier? How do you guys approach transparency of the HiPo program?
Yeah, and this is interesting, and I guess I'm just going to go into like my sales and marketing background, right? And so, and Carla and Lori both said it's a lot of work, right? So these cohorts go through something together. There's also a cost associated with it. And so our desire, right, and our goal is to have 2 cohorts going a year, which would mean, we're touching, 50 very talented leaders, cross-functional. And in my mind, the best way to get legs under a program and get buy-in, right, is that people want to aspire to do this. And they can't aspire to do this if they don't know what it is, right? So we are really looking at this as a tool to engage and inspire our leaders to want to participate in this program. So it's okay if they know that there was a process and they were selected as, high-performing leaders in the organization. Not the only high-performing, because you can only do, 20 a session, but that is an aspirational goal for our team members, and we heard it in our culture survey, right? They wanted career progression and they wanted to be developed. So we took the approach that this could be a great program for us, for our employee base, and there's 25,000 people in Frontier across the United States, that this would be, something that they would want to be a part of. And so we document the journey, right? They're journaling, and then after they leave the program, they'll become mentors to the next program. And so we wanted to make this part of our leadership DNA. So in our mind, the only way to be able to do that is to have people talk about it and market the program so that our internals will really want to be a part of it.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Lori, any other thoughts on this? I know you shared a little bit about that already.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's interesting, just the term potential, because there are some organizations I've worked for in the past where it's potential for what, right? So everyone has some form of potential. So it's what are we looking at? And in these terms today, a lot of what I'm sharing is about leadership potential. But we do want to make sure that we use the term potential for many different things as we have our performance discussions with employees. And so the word potential is not unfamiliar in our organization. Now the term high potential, we are very cautious about. We don't, one of the programs, the one that we're building right now, we're calling it Powering Your Potential. So it's not that we try and, put a label onto something, but as we get to the more senior levels, we really want to have transparent conversations, not about what role they're possibly have potential for, but that we can share that, the value of their contributions, and that, they're equipped to have, that our leaders are equipped to have good conversations with our employees and leaders around this. So there's no guarantees ever, but we truly want to get a little more transparent with, what does potential look like for certain individuals. And we have individual development plan discussions. Hopefully they're happening every month, but we do have a formal process midway through the year as part of our performance management process and cycle. And we encourage all leaders to have discussions with all employees, so it doesn't look like one group is standing out over another. But when they do have these individuals that do have high potential and they've been kind of deemed and identified, we ask our executives and leaders to have a different conversation with these individuals about their desire and their potential and their opportunity to expand and stretch and take on new assignments. So the conversation is gauged a little bit differently, but that's kind of where we're at with our transparency.
That's great. That's great. You're getting there's some good feedback coming through with the Powering Your Potential label, by the way. So
good.
People are liking that. You might want to trademark that.
Ah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your input on that, and we've got a number of good questions that have come in through the Q&A panel from the attendees. But before I get into that, I just wanted to let everybody know about a high potential research project that DeGarmo is doing on the developmental model of HiPo Talent that I highlighted earlier. So this is an opportunity I just want to let everyone know about to learn more about the DNA of a high potential organization. So this is a no-cost engagement. Actually, it'll be quick for participants to complete, and our goal is a couple of things. We want to help you understand what high potential means at your particular organization. How might it be different from other companies and other industries? And for us at DeGarmo, this will be an opportunity for us to gather data that will enable validation of our HiPo development model and the accompanying assessment. So as I mentioned, participation is easy. Assessment will be mobile enabled. It'll take about 20 minutes or less for participants to get through. They can do it, like I said, on a PC or tablet or mobile phone. And what, at the end of the day, you'll receive the items you see here, ultimately including data that enables you to compare your HiPo profile, so to speak. What's the profile for a high potential at your organization to that of the profile at other companies? What are the differences? Looking at size of company, looking at industry, whatever it might be, and see how much difference there is or is not. So there's some documentation in the handouts section, so feel free to download that and reach out to us if you are interested. As I mentioned, it is a no-cost project. We're kind of doing our final recruiting push on this, so I wanted to kind of sneak this in at the end here, and we're going to begin collecting data this summer, so I hope you all can participate. So let's get into some questions. So like I said, a number of good questions have come in, so let me throw these out there, and Lori, Carla, Elisa, all of you can feel free to answer whichever ones you'd like to answer. So let me take a quick look. So there was a question as we were talking about the identification process for HiPos and the role that performance plays. And the question was, are multiple performance evaluations included? And specifically, this question is around, making sure we're not overly simplistic in our view of employees, where we just maybe look at feedback from one manager or one performance review. And, how do you make sure, I'm kind of adding to it here, but how do you make sure you have sort of a robust picture of the individual as you're evaluating and potentially identifying them as a high potential? Any thoughts on that one?
Sure.
This is easy. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Lori.
I'll go quickly on this one, and that's a great question, is that when we look at performance for us, we look at performance over the past 3 years. So if they're here, obviously, for 3 years. And then, obviously, we have individuals who are too new to rate. And we oftentimes have HR business partners that want to put individuals through some of our high potential programs that haven't been here for a full year, but they think it's going to help, retain them, and they think, well, we hired them as a high potential. They haven't proven it out yet here at Experience, so we usually turn that down. But we also, so we like to look at a good 3-year run of performance and to see how consistent or how, the trajectory hopefully is in their performance. So that's one piece of it. But we also have an assessment tool that a manager will take. It's a 180 that helps to feed into the individual's assessment around potential. So do they absorb, we ask the leader, complex concepts and incorporate them into their day-to-day work? Are they able to solve ambiguous problems? Do they think strategically? Do they show care and concern about their colleagues or their employees? Do they manage difficult employees in difficult situations? So those are the things that we start to really refine the questions around these individuals to determine whether, from a performance, what do you see day in and day out? So we use that as a supplement to the identification process.
Great, thanks, Lori. Elisa, did you have some thoughts on that too?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to look at performance, right? So one line we look at is their performance appraisal from the year before and in the mid-year. But then there's also performance highlights and performance challenges, right? And so when I think about performance, if I'm saying it's a sales leader, we're looking to see, how does your territory perform? Are you achieving your goal? How is your turnover? So we're looking for some tangible data to be input by their current leader when they're filling out the entire talent review form. So it's always a good thing, at least in my mind, that we also have some measurable, not just competency level information. So we're actually adding also tangible metrics if they're applicable to their role.
Excellent.
Chad, one thing I'd add to that too is we oftentimes use employee engagement scores. If organizations are doing those, we will use employee engagement scores to look at potential as well, simply because if someone has, and over time as well, if someone has good employee engagement scores, they're doing the right things as a leader to and get the followership. But if they have lower scores, then that may be something that is obviously a development area or may preclude them from being listed as high potential.
Got it. Great. Thanks, everyone. Let me throw out another question here, kind of related to the idea of measurement, but it's measurement down the road and at the program level. What types of KPIs are being used to measure the success of the HiPo programs? Has anyone gotten to that point yet in the maturity of the HiPo program to measure the program's success overall?
We did with our cohorts that go through self-driven succession. So what we've looked at is the retention of those individuals, the promotions, and the other thing we're looking at is lateral moves. And we're trying to create a culture. More and more organizations are becoming flat, and we want to see breadth across different business lines. So lateral moves are golden to us right now. So that's another way that we look and measure success of individuals who've gone through. Top of mind, I'm trying to think of some others, but those are the top 3 for now.
Great. Okay.
We're relatively young, but what we are looking at is in our leadership development program, particularly the ones that are designed for the high potentials, those that we see as having the ability to take on the broader scope or broader roles, is we are looking at promotion rates from those leadership programs and then mapping those back to the talent review sessions to see were those people that were actually identified as high potential before being sent to the program. we're kind of doing almost a little bit of backwards looking versus forward looking, but we're trying to do a little bit of mapping there as well.
Excellent. Okay, here's another good question. I think might have been prompted. I think Elisa was talking about the idea of even looking at some of these attributes for potential during the pre-hire process, during the selection process. So the question is, are you screening pre-hire for these attributes for HiPos, even potentially asking for references from previous employers to ensure that there's potential there, that they've got that long-term high potential identified early on. Any thoughts on that one?
And I think that comes through with like putting that thread through the whole story, right? So the answer is yes, right? So we're saying that, here's 6 leadership competencies that are must-haves that we are evaluating our leaders who are here. So we've actually taken that model, and I guess here's where we'll talk about the relationship with DeGarmo, in working with Anthony and Chad to say, okay, now all of my leaders coming in, I want to make sure that they are demonstrating driving results, strategic thinking, collaborating, influencing, so that it's very familiar. And so yes, the pre-hire assessment for selection for leaders, making sure that you can assess for that coming into the organization, which means that you're going to have a good start when they're here. And then the second piece is taking that same language, and then we use a reference checking tool, skill survey, and making sure that that is also embedded, that those are the questions that you're asking when you're going and looking for the reference as well. So creating that common language and ensuring that you're selecting for it as well.
Excellent.
So I was going to say, it's Lori, we at Experian, we in the last 2 years have implemented an outside group that comes in and helps us support this model, but it's a model where at the top you look at intellect, then values, motivation, behaviors, and experience as you're looking at talent at the more the senior level, or I would say director, VP, and above. And so we're kind of flipping that model because a lot of times we just keep looking for experience. We want similar experience. Oh, what about financial services companies? Let's find people with that. And that's truly, from a high potential, we're looking at and the intellect is not IQ. It's an assessment around how fast do you decipher or filter through information and can make decisions. So it's how quick do you process things. So there's an assessment there. There's a variety of different assessments around values and motivation. Then we get into those behavioral components that align with experience, leadership behaviors, and then the experience. So we've kind of taken a whole different view on what we look for, and it's been very successful for the leaders that have been coming in.
Great. Thanks for that addition, Lori. Well, we unfortunately are out of time. I apologize for those questions we were not able to get addressed, but I want to first just thank our panelists for their time and sharing this really great and really valuable information with us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined the session today. There will be a very brief survey, a little under 5 minutes, probably even less than that, right when you exit the webinar. So if you could please take a few moments to complete that, we'd appreciate it. And just one more reminder, everyone gets SHRM or HRCI credit for this session. The session ID will be sent to you within a week, so no need to reach out to us. But again, thanks to everyone for your participation. Thanks to the panelists, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.